Today I'm going to go through 7 different instrumental combinations which I feel could be used to portray different musical styles in Hollywood film music, including sinister, comedy, magical and triumphant tones. The instrumental choices you make, of course, go hand in hand with other elements such as harmonic, melodic and tempo considerations. In this video, I'll be concentrating on the instrumental side of the composing and decision-making process. So this first example is my interpretation of a sinister tone, using cello and basses, a bassoon, piano and timpani, a choir made up of tenors and basses, along with the violins. Let's take a quick listen to the short 4-bar excerpt I've written. Now there could of course be a whole host of variations of what Sinister could feel like musically, but I was imagining this music functioning as underscore underneath dialogue, possibly for a scene set internally, such as in a dark castle. So consider starting with the cello and basses playing a main musical line in octaves, before then doubling on a piano low down in its register for some added attack and a darker colour. Adding a bassoon can also help to create a more nasally tone, helping to add more presence to the main musical material as well. You could also try adding a choir, in this case the tenors and basses. In my example, I have them singing the tonic chord of E minor, to help add more of a brooding feel, as well as an added human quality as well. Using the timpani can be a great way to also adding some extra attack and definition. I find playing the root note of a chord at the beginning of every couple of measures helps to punctuate the beginning of the measure. For some extra drama and dissonance, you could also try the violins with a held pedal note or two, a note or notes which stays static while the underlying harmony changes, and in this case is in a higher register. So now let's have a quick look at how changing an instrument or two can affect the overall feel or tone. Here I've swapped out the bassoon for a contrabassoon, which not only has an extended range compared to a normal bassoon, but also has a more pronounced double reed sound quality. I also have the cello and basses playing with a sol ponticello tremolo playing technique, playing near the bridge of the instrument, with an added tremolo. So let's take a listen. To me, these two adjustments help to transform the initial piece from sinister into a more creepy feeling. Okay, so moving on, let's next take a look at which instruments you could use to achieve a magical tone or style. You could consider going for a celesta, with cello and basses playing pizzicato, along with the violins playing a held pedal note, this time with the tremolo playing technique. Like for the previous style, there are of course countless variations of what could be interpreted as magical. I've gone for something which you may hear in, say, Lord of the Rings, playing underneath a scene with, say, sylvan elves in a forest. So firstly, the main musical focus is given to the celesta. For me, I'll automatically head straight for my favourite celesta patch, from Spitfire Audio's Percussion library, when tasked with achieving a magical tone. So why does the celesta have an association with magic in Hollywood? It could be from one of its earliest uses in the great classical repertoire, Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite, in particular with the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, and also more recently with John Williams' use of the instrument in his Harry Potter scores. In addition to the celesta, you could also try adding the cello and basses playing pizzicato. Pizzicato is often associated with lightheartedness, possibly due to its more percussive nature. In this example, the pizz could be interpreted as adding a sense of slow momentum or a feeling of grounding, like say noble or wise sylvan elves. For some added movement or motion, you could also consider adding a tremolo pedal note in the violins, playing just into the upper half of the violin's register. Okay, so let's take a quick look at how a simple variation in the instrumentation can affect the overall sound. So firstly, I've taken out the low statesman-like pits in the cello and basses. Taking these out, suddenly everything feels a little lighter in nature. I've also added a harp playing an arpeggiated chord at the beginning of each bar, along with changing the original violin tremolo for a trill, a rapid alternation between the F and G a major second above. To me, these changes help to give a more fairy tale-like quality to the music compared to the original version. Now for something different. For achieving a loud, majestic and uplifting triumphant feel, consider making use of the full brass section, along with some percussion, choir and low strings. Brass instruments can be fantastic at making a brash and bold statement, giving a sense of weight and power. So have a go at giving the trombones and tuba notes from each chord. The trombones with open voice chords spanning over an octave, with the tuba given the root note of each chord, preferably with notes below the bass clef stave for maximum power. Next, consider giving the French horns a melodic phrase. Having say 4 or 6 horns on a single melodic line can help to ensure the melody is heard over all of the other loud instruments. For some added rhythmic excitement, you could then also use the trumpets to fill in any space in between the melodic notes. Here, while the horns have a held half note or minim, the trumpets are playing this quick and precise triplet pattern using 2 notes from each triad. For some extra presence in the low end, you could then try giving the cello and basses the root notes of each chord. To add a further majestic quality, consider writing for a full choir. Here I have the sopranos, altos, tenors and basses, all playing notes from each triad. Finally, you could use the timpani for some extra attack and definition for the low end, along with the tam-tam to help add further energy and sonic colour to the initial main downbeat. So again, let's see how this overall tone could be varied by adjusting the instrumental combinations. Firstly, you could add a snare drum, which could help to instantly give a more militaristic feel. Adding the high strings can also help to give a greater sense of excitement and movement, especially with fast runs leading into the first downbeat. You could also try doubling, say, the trumpet part with some high woodwinds for some extra sparkle. Here I have the piccolo and flutes utilising the same frantic triplet pattern, again just using notes from each triad. Let's take a quick listen. To me, these additions have helped to achieve a feeling of triumph, which is even more excitement, movement, and a more militaristic association. Now for a more sentimental or calmer tone, you could try experimenting with a combination of strings, along with clarinets and female choir. These instruments, when combined, offer a warm colour, helping to achieve a feeling of tenderness or nostalgia, as well as being well suited to offering a softer overall dynamic. So you could consider starting with, say, the first violins, maybe playing a high pedal note, with divided second violins, along with violas, playing the 3 notes of a triad between them, lower down in the octave just below middle C. For some added warmth, the clarinets could also be a great addition. Finally, using a choir, in my case the sopranos and altos, could also help in achieving a more calming and even ethereal tone. Let's again look at how varying this instrumental combination could have an effect. I'm going to experiment with taking out the strings and introducing more woodwinds. So giving a couple of alto flutes the second violin part could help to give a more human feel, due to the breathiness aspect of the flute. The bassoon could then also replace the original viola part. By taking out the strings, to me it portrays a colder sense of sentimentality, possibly the recalling of an event or time in one's life tinged with an element of an emotional pain. Compare this to the strings, which I feel help to give a greater emotional presence because of the warmth that strings typically are associated with. Moving on to comedy, for this excerpt I'm imagining a playful exchange between 2 characters in something like a romantic comedy. An effective instrumental combination could be strings, with the cello and basses playing pizzicato, a celesta and piano, along with the clarinets and bassoon. Let's start with perhaps the easiest and most cliched way of achieving a comedic effect, the use of pizzicato, which I have here in the cello and basses. So why does pizzicato have such a strong association with comedy? You could possibly go back to some of the early forms of entertainment, particularly with ballets and operas of, say, the 19th century. Composers, such as Rossini in his opera The Barber of Seville, would frequently use the pizzicato technique to portray a light-footedness. In an effort to keep a light-hearted tone, while adding some rhythmic interest, consider having the high strings playing a syncopated pattern. Here, the first and second violins, along with the violas, are simply playing short bowed notes, using notes from each respective triad. These could of course be played with the pizzicato technique, but it can offer some timbral variation, having the high strings playing short articulated notes with the bow instead. Melody-wise, to continue with a light-hearted, playful tone, you could consider using the celesta along with doubling on a piano. To me, this gives a similar feel to a child's music box, with its association with simplicity. To add some further sonic interest to the accompaniment pattern, consider doubling the violins on woodwind instruments such as the clarinets, with the bassoons doubling the pizzicato notes in the cello and basses. Towards the end of the passage, you can see I've made use of doubling bassoons and pizzicato cello, a common instrumental combination in comedy music. Again, let's take a listen at how the tone can change by one simple switch, having the violins play the tune alongside the celesta and piano. And now with the melody played on 2 extremely different instruments, the piccolo and tuba. Next, let's have a look at an instrumental combination you could use when looking to achieve a military feel. I'm imagining a scene of an American military unit pushing forward. Use of brass instruments such as French horns, along with the strings and a selection of percussion, say timpani, snare drum, bass drum and crash cymbals, can be a great way of achieving a military feel. Let's take a listen first. For this one, consider firstly loading up a variety of percussion instruments. Snare drum, timpani, grand cassa or bass drum, and crash cymbals or piatti are always effective for a military association. This is due to instruments such as the snare drum being used as signalling devices to convey military instructions in historical battles. In this example, the busy snare drum and constant timpani hits, along with the odd punctuation with the accented bass drum and crash cymbals, helps to portray an American military tone, with similarities extending to a drum corps style of playing. Brass instruments such as trumpets or horns also have a similar association with all things military, again due to instruments such as a bugle being used for conveying signals on a battlefield. In this example, I've given the French horns the melody, with intervals such as the perfect fourth between the first two notes, G and C. Other instruments such as the trumpet could be equally as effective at carrying the main melodic material as well. In addition, the driving strings also helps to add a feeling of movement and urgency. Low repeated octaves in the cello and basses underpin the harmony, with the violins playing an active scalic part, mimicking the snare drum rhythms. So again, let's take a quick look at how a simple instrumental change can affect the sound. Firstly, you could try replacing the French horns, giving the trumpets the melody instead. Here I've taken the horn part and moved it up an octave for them. You could also try experimenting with percussion. Instead of a crisp tone and busy snare drum part, I've replaced this with a tenor drum, a more traditional drum without any snares, along with playing a much more simplified part. Let's take a listen. And finally, now for something much more stripped back. In an effort to achieve a tone which offers a feeling of serenity, calmness, and full of space, possibly accompanying a scene where a character is in a period of reflection. This instrumental combination makes use of just 3 instruments: a synth pad, harp, and piano. The piano is providing the main melodic and harmonic foundation, awash with reverb to create an almost otherworldly sound. The simulation of the large acoustic space can also help to further portray, say, a past memory. The harp harmonics, focused on a constant note of E-flat, then help further in creating an ethereal sound, whilst providing a degree of movement. If this were to be played by a harpist, you may want to use 2 strings instead, with firstly the E-flat, then its enharmonic D-sharp on another string. By using 2 separate strings instead, the player wouldn't be stopping the resonance of the E-flat in order for it to sound again on the next note. Finally, the held pedal note of E-flat in the synth pad helps to add a contemporary colour to the sound, along with acting as a glue between the more percussive piano and harp notes. Let's take a listen without the synths and harp. With just the solo piano, to me this evokes a feeling of loneliness instead. So hopefully those 7 instrumental combinations can prove as a useful starting point when approaching these particular styles. Now remember that instrumentation choices are just one component of the composing process, and go hand in hand with other musical decisions such as harmonic, melodic or tempo considerations. When trying out your own instrumental combinations and creating your own pieces, if you're a Cubase user, you may find the video My Top 20 Cubase Tips for Composers useful to speed up your composing workflow. So I hope you found these combinations useful. See you in the next video.